Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Riffhard podcast. My guest today is the one and only legend, Mr. Chris Impellitteri of the band Impellitteri. They have a new album out now called War Machine. Let's get into it. Chris Impellitteri, welcome to the Riffhard podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Eyal.
You know, something I've actually wanted to ask you about for a while, because I come from a classical background. My dad's a conductor, and that's kind of my background is coming from that world. And so growing up being an electric guitar player, I was around a lot of classical virtuosos, and I just noticed that there were a lot of differences. Lots of people would say like metal is just classical music with electric instruments, but when I would actually sit there and pay attention to what a violinist would be doing, the techniques are very different, and guitar doesn't sustain, like, because there's no bow. There's a lot of key differences, and the way that the notes are laid out and the tunings are very, very different. So taking a violin piece and transcribing it for guitar isn't necessarily going to just fall so logically on a fretboard, yet you have done that your whole career. So I'm wondering, when you first got started with working Baroque pieces or classical pieces onto the guitar, was it weird to take those note choices and make them work?
No, because I had a really good guitar instructor. I took lessons for 6 years, learning music theory. And, he would show me a simple like Bach pattern. So it wasn't something that I had to transcribe or learn from sheet music. It was literally taught to me from another guitar player that had already kind of mastered the concept. So because he laid it out in a way that it was palatable for me to absorb and understand, it was actually easier, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because what you say is absolutely true. I mean, even if you think about the scale of the violin, right?
It's tiny.
It's exactly. So, but having said that, it doesn't mean that violin is an easy instrument to play, right? It's actually quite challenging. So having said that, the way I was taught, simplistic, almost childhood, patterns that you see, the 4 patterns by Bach, and obviously Yngwie uses them very well. And so do like Uli Roth, guys like that. For me, really where I used classical music to my advantage, it was really trying to absorb the melodies, right? The phrasing. Now, it doesn't mean that I've mastered, like, it doesn't mean I'm Vivaldi number 2 or, Mozart. But it's interesting because when I started the band Impellitteri, we really just wanted to be a band like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest on steroids, mixed with like Vivaldi soloing. And Vivaldi soloing, I know later it's going to come in where people to me are going to say Yngwie, right? And I love Yngwie, but it wasn't about that. My grandmother, that was in our house a lot. Vivaldi, Beethoven, Grieg. There were so many different classical artists being played. And so ultimately, when we wanted to put the band together and create our music, we ended up utilizing a lot of that kind of influence subconsciously. And also another biggie was the power of Beethoven, right?
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Anyways, I know it was a long-winded answer for your simple question, but yeah, really, it was taught to me, right, by a guitar player on a guitar, so I could visualize it, seeing someone else play it. Then I could interpret it and do it myself on the guitar, if that makes sense.
It does. I actually think that guitar is super inefficient for sight reading anyways. There's a reason for why it's such a rare thing for guitar players to be really good at. Lots of guitar players are okay, but to be like actually good at it like a classical player, it's super rare, just because guitar doesn't lend itself well to it, because there's 19 different ways to play the same thing. So I think that actually learning visually, and I think that's also why scale, the bird's eye view scale charts and tabs work so well, is because guitar is a very, very visual instrument. That actually makes a lot of sense to me. And it's funny that you say Yngwie, because I don't consider you guys similar at all. I hear your background being much more rooted in actual classical, in his in much more, Baroque patterns. Even though you use Baroque patterns, like I hear, like you just said, the power of Beethoven. I hear the classical, I guess the harmonic content and also the melodic sense much more in what you do, and I hear more straight up Baroque in what he does.
Yeah. Well, realistically, remember, I grew up in the United States of America, and the kind of guitar playing, believe it or not, that was in my house, because I grew up with my grandparents. My grandfather had a lot of Chet Atkins. So I would hear that. I would hear Roy Clark, Glenn Campbell. I mean, these are players that were, I mean, especially in the early 1970s when I was a child, they were phenomenal, but they had an approach that was very, how do you frame that? I mean, when they say rooted in country, it's almost like American versus European,
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yes,
So, I
totally.
mean, I certainly hear myself when I play, and I certainly don't, even though I love guys like Uli Roth and Schenker and Yngwie and guys like that, I don't sound anything like them, right? They're all European guitar players. I came from Connecticut to California. I mean, I grew up in a different kind of environment, listening to different types of music. But having said that, things like Vivaldi, The Four Seasons, how can you not love that and let that influence you in some way? The violin concertos by Vivaldi, same thing. And obviously the heavy, every 3-year-old child could talk about Beethoven's The Fifth, right? But this is all stuff we hear more so in America, probably not as deep into classical as you would think, right? And it's interesting. I'm sitting there going, how do you frame that for if you grew up with someone like Glenn Campbell and Roy Clark and, these fantastic country players? Do you just call it country, or do you call it American? What would you frame that? How would you frame that?
I consider it like more along the lines of folk, not folk music like somebody with an acoustic guitar sitting there singing hippie music. I just mean like the roots of what became the quote unquote American sound. And you even hear that in Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, where he was trying to do an American sound. It's much more pentatonic based. And I think that's kind of the DNA of the American sound, is more of a pentatonic type, I guess, core, and the European isn't. All right. Before we get back to this episode, I want to take a minute to talk about Riffhard, riffhard.com, not the Riffhard podcast, because this podcast is actually tied to our online school, Riffhard. And if you're new here, it's the world's best online school for modern metal guitarists. We've got hundreds of lessons from guitar players such as Javier Reyes, Jason Richardson, Wes Hawk, Dan Sugarman, Miles Dimitri Baker. Man, I could just keep on going on. Aaron Marshall from Intervals, Mike Stringer of Spirit Box. I'm reading now because I don't want to leave anybody off. Dean Lamb of Arcspire. It just goes on and on. It's like all the best of the best. And you get tons more than just lessons with them. You get instant access when you join, but there's also all kinds of challenges. Like once a month, we do something like 10-day down picking challenge, or a 10-day tremolo picking challenge, or a 10-day alternate picking challenge, where we really guide you through the lessons and make sure that everybody is getting better. We're not just giving you these videos and sending you out into the wilderness to fend for yourself. We are right there with you. We also do 6 songwriting challenges. Like we have a monthly one called King of the Riff, where we give you a brief, like write a Spartan war anthem or write a technical death metal song with like some criteria. And there's prizes that include guitars and cables and all kinds of cool gear. And we also have private Facebook and Discord communities of like-minded and supportive people, no assholes. That's really, really important to include. Now, with Riffhard, you also get a subscription to Nail the Mix. They live under the same site. So in Nail the Mix, you get to learn how to mix metal. You also get access to Buster Otoholm's Beginner's Guide to Recording Metal. So if you're just playing guitar and trying to record yourself, you have a band and you want to make demos for your band members, or you want to make your own demos, but you just can't get them to sound anything but garbage, or you just can't get past the starting gate, it's too complicated, we've got you covered. Buster Otoholm will show you how to do it. And also, if you want to take it further and actually learn how to mix, there's no place better than Nail the Mix over at URM Academy. And that's all included with Riffhard subscription. All right, so if that sounds interesting, you want to check it out, go to riffhard.com. I'll see you there. And let's get back into this episode. Even though you will hear Yngwie, European guys playing blues-inspired sections, and you'll hear American dudes doing neoclassical. But I think in the core, it's more like in the core DNA. So I almost consider it like a folk thing. Like if you listen to the folk music from Europe, it's very much in in like harmonic minor and in all kinds of interesting modes and keys that you hear in classical music. And you hear the folk music here, it's all, pentatonic based, or mostly pentatonic based. So that's how I view it, at least. That's kind of how it makes sense to me.
I like that. That's a good explanation. I also, in my youth, right? I guess I started guitar, I think around 12 years old. And at that point, I'm trying to think the guitar players that were really shaping me, because remember, as a 13-year-old, as much as the family's playing, classical music and Engelbert Humperdinck and, all of that kind of stuff, right? Two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. But, also at that time, there were guitar players like Gary Moore that had a huge impact on me, right? And so now we're someone coming from Ireland, right? Much more deeply rooted in blues playing. So obviously a lot of pentatonics, occasionally you're going to see the flat fifth thrown in there. But that was also a huge part of it as well. And I think the reason I'm telling you this, when I really think about some of my early influences, right? I think about guys like Gary Moore, Brian May, although Brian May's from England, Richie Blackmore. So I had a melting, I guess I feel like in some ways it's like a melting pot of all these influences that kind of eventually shaped me. But nonetheless, I'm still, American kid, with probably that overtone of more of an American guitarist than a European guitarist.
Well, it's when I hear you doing, taking bends and your vibrato, it's very, and I mean this as a compliment, it's very legit American sounding. That probably sounds bad to say that, but I don't know exactly how to explain it, but like it sounds to me like not someone trying to emulate a sound. Like it sounds very very natural, I guess.
I see. Yeah, I have to be honest too, when we talk about emulation, I fail miserably. I've never been able to be a good person to really try to emulate someone else. The guitar for me has always been an instrument that's like my second voice. And it's a very personal experience when I play the guitar. I started playing out of a tragedy when I was when I was 12 years old. And I remember just the guitar allowed me to speak, I had a difficult time as a child communicating with people. And so the guitar was like my comfort blanket. And so, I just learned how to play using, music theory, stuff that my teacher would teach me. But a lot of it was really self-taught and just exploring the instrument and trying to express whatever this internal anger or frustration or whatever it was through the instrument, So, but when I would try to mimic people, it's like, I'm horrible at mimicking people. I try, but you fail miserably, It's like I can just be myself.
Isn't that the story of so many great artists and musicians over time? Is something dark or something terrible usually leads to the best art, unfortunately. It's kind of a cliche to say it, but it's absolutely the truth. If you just look at the lives of anybody who you listen to, or anybody who lots of people listen to, there's probably something that happened or some circumstance they were in that led to them choosing to express themselves this way, and also to have the energy to put into it. That's another factor. It's not just that there's this need for expression. It's also having the willpower to actually put the time in to do something extraordinary is it's not normal. Like it's not a normal thing. So I think it's abnormal circumstances create abnormal types of behaviors, like spending enough time on an instrument to become great at it. That's just not, it's not the norm. So
I see what you're saying. I share that too with kids, that want to become a musician. I even share sometimes the whole life story of how it started. I don't mind. I mean, it's so many years ago, it doesn't affect me anymore. But in all sincerity, and I'll share this with you and your followers. I mean, when I was 9 years old, the issue that happened to me is both my mother and father committed suicide. So I basically went to bed one night with a family, woke up the next morning as an orphan. And thank God my grandparents, who were young and loved me, they gave me a choice. They said, listen, we love you. You can go to a homeless shelter, or you can basically come with us. And they said, of course, we want you, but we want to give you that freedom. But having said that, here's 9-year-old kid waking up one morning with a family and happy, and all of a sudden I'm alone in the world. I have nothing. So my grandmother was the one that said, hey, we really got to find an outlet for him, to find it something so he doesn't go down a bad road or whatever. And so she brought me to a guitar store, and I'll never forget it. 2 guitars were hanging on the wall. One was a copy of a Les Paul, and one was a copy of a Stratocaster. And of course, people know me for playing Strats, but I actually chose the Les Paul called a Cameo. And I fell in love with it. And I immediately, although I couldn't speak, I could use the guitar to talk. And the reason I'm going on with this story is because a lot of people in the 80s, some people understood what I was doing, other people didn't. If you listen, like the very first song we ever recorded, it's called Lost in the Rain. It was on a record called the Impellitteri Black EP, right? And I'm playing pretty well, and there's a lot of fire in the playing. And that became my thing. And people used to, some people be like, oh my God, so fast, it's amazing. And other people are like, he sucks, he's a wanker. And I can see both sides of the story. But the wanker thing, I think they didn't comprehend what was happening as I was trying to release that anger, that frustration, and that, just that unharnessed, energy. Just wanted to get it out of me. And so
I can actually
was through the instrument.
I can see that actually when I see old videos of you playing, like you're using a lot of force, whereas when you see a lot of faster players, typically they start playing lighter. So one of the things that struck me about when you get going is I mean, maybe you're playing softer, but it certainly doesn't look like it. It looks like you're really, really digging in and powering through it, which is really impressive. Is that consciously, as a kid, did you know that you were using that as a way to communicate, or you were just doing it?
I think I was just doing it. Subconsciously, I probably knew I was communicating, right? Because people were paying attention, and I could speak with the guitar. And by the way, what you said about my picking technique and forcefulness, there's good and bad, right? I mean, I had my great period. My great period was when I first started, especially with the Impellitteri Black EP. I was very articulate. My picking technique, I think, was much more applicable the way I would show players to play now. And then there was about a 3-year period of my life where I think I sucked. I think everything caught up with me. The family thing, my grandparents were now dying. That was the end of the thing. And at that time, I remember doing an instructional video, which sucked. I did I think it was a stand in line stuff. I did some shows where I was god awful, and I was just falling apart. And the picking attack, it just became too much. It was too I was trying to beat the instrument to death, which is a horrible way to play the instrument. And then eventually someone showed me some footage. I'm like, oh my God, you're right. It sucks. I got to get back on that path where I was with the EP. And eventually I started working on my picking technique, and I found a happy medium, right? So because I love guys like Al Di Meola, it's really percussive.
Oh yeah.
And clays. Now, a lot of it has to do with the palm muting, right? So I found somewhere that happy medium for me, at least, between, having that articulate percussive attack, but also lightening up. So you're not killing the string, because what happens is you get resistance. I use pretty heavy picks. And the problem is with that, theoretically, is all of a sudden the pick, it's almost like when you get a notch in the pick, it catches on the string. So I quickly learned to back off. And that's probably where I started getting my technique back. And that was probably around 93 or 94. It just started coming back. I know some kid, we did some NAMM show for JBL. I think it's around 1996 or whatever. There's some footage you can see, and kids got the camera in my face. We're playing in front of a room with like 30 people for like just demoing gear, but you can see the picking techniques back, all the articulation and all of that. So anyways, but anyways, that's where I was going with the, whether it, for me, it was, I wanted to retain the percussiveness and the attack and the aggression, but I also realized the technique wasn't working, especially what I was doing in probably around 89 or 90. It was just terrible. So,
we did this course with Zach Wild a couple of years ago, and one of the things that always stood out to me about him over the years was how hard he plays when he's like really going fast. Like he's like really picking hard, but then spending a week with him, like 5 feet away from him and watching how he plays, it's much more refined than it looks on, at a concert or in a music video. He plays a lot harder than a lot of people, but it's still not like this ridiculous level to where it's uncontrollable or it chokes out the strings or he's destroying his arms or whatever. And I think you're right. I think that when I think of the best players who are fast but also play harder, it's definitely not uncontrolled. There's definitely like you said, a happy medium where you're playing hard enough to really get that attack, get that tone, get that vibe, but also not being destructive. And it's same with drummers. I think with drummers, drummers that play harder are better generally for heavier music, but there's definitely a point where it's too hard, where you can hit a cymbal so hard that it basically chokes itself out. There's definitely a too much with it.
Yeah. What's also helped me at least evolve as a player is I realize there really shouldn't be rules when you're playing. And what I mean by that, so when I first did the Impellitteri Black EP, everything had to be up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Very methodical, right? 3 notes per string, etc. And I had to make certain I would pick every note. As a matter of fact, most of the time I'd practice, I would always practice without an amp so I could make sure I could do it acoustically, right? But as I got older, I realized watching other players, they were using, economy picking, and something I started doing when I started to try to mimic guys like Albert Lee and Steve Morse. I started doing my own kind of chicken picking, where all of a sudden, you're playing down, up, down, down, and then, but the up now, all of a sudden you're plucking, you're string skipping, plucking with your middle finger, right? And I found like, maybe it's cheating, but I found like there was this comfort level there where all of a sudden there was consistency in the attack, right? Versus, the first 6 notes are ridiculously percussive and then the rest of it's dying off because the pick's getting choked or notched or whatever. So I found other ways to play, and some people might say, well, that's really chicken picking or that's partially economy picking. But I just found, it just whatever I'm doing now works for me. And then I threw out the rules. I said, it doesn't have to be down, up, down, up, down every 5 seconds. There's nothing wrong with legato, right?
I've heard I think that the technique that you're talking about, I've heard most commonly these days referred to as hybrid picking. And it's something that I've noticed that in the past maybe 5 years has started to work its way into just another technique that metal lead guitar players learn, kind of like alternate picking, sweep picking. Like it's now on the list of, essential techniques, where there was a long time where it was not, people didn't even think of it. Like they would see Steve Morse do it or something, but would not consider actually using it themselves. But it really is great. It really is great. It definitely opens up so many possibilities for things that would be impossible or or too difficult to really pull off reliably. And then also just different types of parts that a pick is not best suited for.
Yeah.
It's a really, I don't think it's cheating. I don't think there's a such thing.
Yeah. Well, on where I started to develop it for me personally, I did an instrumental song on one of our records. It's called 17th Century Chicken Picking. I mean, there's a ton of kids on YouTube doing it. And that's where I really fell into this because I was doing a lot of string skipping, right? And I was trying to figure out how could I make that switch with my right hand comfortably. And I found like, oh, one day I slipped and I plucked. And that fell into this beautiful, happy accent. It was like, oh, this is really cool. This really works well. And it's easy to do consistently, you know?
Yeah. The string skipping, I think, is the number one reason to learn how to do it. Especially when you start to get past just one string skipped. If you're trying to keep a high tempo, it starts to become, really the only way to really, really pull it off. But you're saying it's easy. I don't think it's easy. I just think it's reliable once you get it down, just because you have to, now you're not just thinking about your pick. You have to work the whole other part of your body into the motion, and get it in time.
There's a really good exercise I found that really helps you develop that technique. So let's take the G string and the high E, right? Mm-hmm. So if you start on frets 5, 7, and 9, right, you're playing C, D, E, right? And then the high E on the 5th fret, that's your A. So you'd be playing C, D, E, A, E, D, C. Mm-hmm. Do that in repetition, right? And then switch it up. Now you're playing on the G string, C, D, E, but instead of the A on the high E string, now play the B. And then go back down to the G, come back up, and then play the C, which now you're on fret 8 on the high E string. Play that over and over again. Do it slowly first, like ba, 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 and the bas are the pluck, the high E, right? So it's ba 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 a da da ba 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 b da 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 c da da ba 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 ba, and you start doing that almost like you're playing a rudiment on a snare, right? And eventually you fall. It's almost like, what's that saying? The penny drops, and all of a sudden it becomes very comfortable. And now switch it up and use different strings and different sequences. That's kind of how I fell into that, to be honest. Pretty simplistic.
But it makes sense because you're working it into a pattern that you're already familiar with. You're not having to learn an exercise like that. You're not having to learn this whole other style of playing. That's an exercise that you might do with a pick if you want to work on your string skipping. So it makes a lot of sense. So the only thing that you really have to think about is getting that finger pluck in time.
Well, exactly. And the key thing is, remember, and the pattern I just told you, it's C, D, E on the G, that's down, up, down with a pick. And then the pluck, middle finger, is the A on the fifth fret for high E string. So now you've gone down, up, pluck, down, up, down, pluck. Sorry, I'm trying to visualize it in my head, right? And that's it. And then just start to build your speed and your tempo. And the key thing is to make sure that you have that nice percussive attack, right? Because that's all the reason I like to pop the string, right? That's kind of fun to me. Almost like a bass player when he's playing funk, and then they're popping the string. It has an interesting attack, which goes very well with the alternate picking.
Interesting. I've heard some people actually try to do the exact opposite. So it's interesting to hear you say, thinking of it more like slapping on a bass or something like that.
No, not slapping though, but popping. Oh,
popping. Yeah, sorry, popping. But a more percussive technique, because I know some guys who use it kind of as a legato enhancement, because they use it as kind of I guess, a midpoint between picking and just legato without
I see.
any picking whatsoever. And so they try to do it as light as possible so that you don't even hear that it sounds like a legato passage.
I see.
But
So
yeah.
almost feathery. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Tom Quayle or Per Nilsson, I think, are two really great examples of doing it that way. I don't think one way is better or worse. They're just totally different sounds. But it's interesting to hear you say that that's your approach, is to get it to be intense, but which makes sense.
But not to the point where you're going to break the string. Don't, I mean,
No,
not
of course not.
overemphasize that, right? But it's just not like da 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 da, and you don't hear it. It's you know, there's a little
almost
bit
like an accent.
A little bit, exactly.
Yeah, because if you're picking hard and then you suddenly just have like a feathery note in there, that's kind of weird, I think.
Exactly.
So even though it's a different kind of sound than picking, it seems like it makes sense dynamically with how you're playing the rest of the line.
Yeah. And another reason, when you hear my attack, whether it's alternate picking or alternate picking with the plucking kind of thing, one of the biggest inspirations I hear in my head when I play like that, or when I developed it, this may shock you. So right now we've talked a lot about, like the Vivaldis and the Mozarts and the great classical composers. The one technique that I was always in awe of, that I always try to emulate in some way, is Eddie Van Halen playing Spanish Fly. Are you familiar with that instrument they did? Not the hammer, but all the other stuff, right? The attack is incredible.
That's actually when I think of him, that's actually the part that sticks out to me the most, was the way his attack, more so than the tapping stuff and all that, which I think that's what a lot of players think about when they think of him or are inspired by. But what I find inspirational about him is how intensely he would play. It's because not too many people were able to do that, or back then, at least not in that style. It's kind of an unheard of thing. So that kind of makes sense to hear you say that. So I'm not shocked, actually.
Yeah.
So these days, when you do play, what is it that you're prioritizing? Because I imagine that the way that you go about practicing now is different than it was when you were 15. So say you have an hour for a guitar, how are you going to prioritize that?
I don't consider playing my guitar practice or even work. I just love playing the guitar, and I just love to express myself with the instrument. And it's really dependent on my mood. If I'm in a highly energetic mood and, I'm on fire, well, there's probably going to be a lot of, shredding. And it's really I do that often just to make sure I maintain muscle memory. Right. So I'll go through all of the, my traditional chords, a lot of the repetition that I use, you'll see in my playing. There's no set. I don't sit with a metronome, put it at 120 and just start working on scales. I've never done that. For me personally, I just play based on my mood, my feeling. Now, right now, as a matter of fact, we're about to announce we're going to be doing some live shows for the new record. And so now, I am, when I'm sitting down, if I have an hour or two here and there in the windows, I'm working on relearning solos. And so at that point, I may take the metronome out and make sure I'm playing them correctly or close enough to, the way when I'm playing live. A lot of that is working on my, my articulate picking technique, making sure that I'm not missing notes. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, it's a very odd routine I have, I do work on not just soloing, but I also work on making sure the riffs and the
Mhm.
rhythms are correct, because that's a big thing I wish more guitar channels would pick up on. As much as I'm
Yep.
flattered, I'll stick with the people that like me, right? So the people that say, "Oh man, you're so fast, you're amazing," and they give me all that those accolades, and you're humbled, and well, thank you for liking me, right? But the reality is, the guitar solo to me has always been icing on the cake. It's never been the first thing I think about when I play the guitar. For me, I've always viewed myself more as a composer, right? Even if it's rock music. For me, it's like, where's that great riff? Once I find that great riff, right, then that evolves into the verse and the pre-chorus and the chorus, eventually the bridge and the solo and yada, yada, yada. So for me, even when I'm practicing, a lot of times I'm working on making sure I'm playing those riffs correctly, making sure the rhythm is there, right? To make sure that, because again, we're going to be playing this for an audience that has to absorb this. And if you play great solos but crappy rhythm, then what good is it? So I work on my rhythm stuff a
Mhm.
lot, right? To make sure that I'm pedaling correctly. The riffs are articulate, not messy, especially when it's a complicated riff. That's it. And then of course, then I get into the soloing thing. So that's
You
kind of
know,
the way I play.
that that is something that I think really does get overlooked way too much. And if you think about it, you are playing rhythm like 85 to 90% of the time. That is the majority of what you're doing. It's on a record or at a concert. Like that is the majority of the guitar playing. So if that is not super solid, you're kind of making a mistake, in my opinion, because that means that 85% of what you're playing is not solid, and the solos better be amazing to overshadow the crappy rhythm playing. Uh, I think that we actually have pushed it a lot to guitar players that they need to spend a lot more time on rhythm than they would have thought. And I think that because so many instructional videos and magazine articles and just features on guitar players have been so solo driven, and it's always the thing that I guess even on social media tends to be the most viral. It gets the most attention and it's the sexiest, but being able to downpick or pedal in time for an entire song at tempo takes a lot of stamina. You can't just do it. Like, it requires maintenance, it requires stamina, and guitar players really should work on it. And I've also noticed if someone wants to get really great at playing solos, all the best soloists I've ever worked with or known have always been great rhythm players. Always. Like, I've never actually worked with somebody in real life who was just this amazing soloist who just was on another level and played the most articulate but also technically great solos that had just like perfect timing and feel, who weren't also great rhythm players. What I noticed was the dudes who were over focused on soloing and bad at rhythm tended to have really sloppy solos. They like out of time, or just weird numbers of notes that don't make sense. Like, not that they're trying to do some interesting subdivision, just a group, some random note grouping that doesn't actually fit in time. And that's just what I've noticed is being a great lead player requires you to be a great rhythm player first.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You and I are talking right now because the band Impellitteri we've been very lucky and very fortunate to have success in some countries around the world where we've done really well. And I'll tell you right now, we've done really well, not just because, I mean, yes, I get a lot of compliments of, you're a great soloist, and they compare me to whomever, right? But a lot of our fans, they're not guitar players. They don't care. What they want to hear is a great riff. They want to hear a great song, a
Mm-hmm.
great anthem chorus, something that they can relate to, right? And that starts with the great riff, a great rhythm, right? Something that touches them emotionally. And then if I'm lucky and I'm on my A game, maybe I just create that solo that just takes it over the top. That's magic. We just did a song on the new record called Out of My Mind, heavy metal. And that's a perfect example. The riff sounds very much kind of like, at least to me, it sounds like Burn from Deep Purple, but in the year 2024, come to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's people around the world. I've been doing a lot of press and media are freaking out over the song. They're loving it. And we know it's going to be an anthem. We know when we play concerts, especially in Japan, we know every hand's going to be up in the air singing every word. And the song could stand on its own without the solo. And then the solo kicks in, and I've gotten a lot of compliments like, oh my God, that's an amazing solo. And I'm doing some crazy two-handed stuff. And, it's got all your, the quick passages. It's all there, but it's nothing more than icing on the cake. I was lucky this time that the icing seems to taste good, make the cake a little better. But the rhythm and the riff and the song, the structure, that's the cake. And if the cake isn't good, then it's worthless. Right. So
Totally.
it was a horrible analogy. People are going, man, and culture's an idiot.
I agree. And it makes a lot of sense. And what I've noticed is with bands that are known for being like a great lead guitar band or something, they don't tend to get fan bases unless their songs are actually pretty good too. People get, unless it's like, a room of 50 guitar players there to watch a guitar player, like a real fan base that goes beyond just, guitar nerds requires songs that people like. It's
yeah. I mean, listen, we are now in the year 2024. There are a billion kids that make your mouth drop that are insanely talented. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. When I learned something, whether it's, the Four Seasons by Vivaldi or whatever I had to learn, a lot of this had to be taught to me either by a teacher or you had to sit down with a record and keep lifting the needle over and over and desperately trying to learn the piece by ear. But today, if I do something really fast and articulate and cool and someone can see me on YouTube in an hour, some of these kids are like, okay, I got it, and then they develop it from there. So they're so far ahead of where we ever were, right? Because of the access to knowledge, right? And the tools that are there for them. And the reason I'm saying that, so today, there are a million guys. When we started this whole thing, like when I started the band Impellitteri with our singer, Rob Rock, people called us, I don't know if it was either speed metal, power metal, but we were doing the shredding and Rob was doing all the crazy singing. And we were one of the first bands to do that type of music, right? I'm not saying we were the first one to do the shredding thing, but to add it into like to the power metal element. And at that time, when I think about all the guitar players, at least in LA, someone told me this the other day and I realized, my God, I think you were right about the names. When we started, there was Yngwie got to it first, right? So he was the first guy. There was a guy named Jimmy Bell who was awesome on the East Coast that I loved. But those two guys were like the first two guys. And then there was Gilbert, there was me, there was Vinnie Moore, Tony McAlpine, and then two-handed guitar player, Badio, right? So we were like the 5 or 6 guys that were really doing this and everybody was checking everybody out. Like, who's the fastest, who can do this, blah, blah, blah. But then you look at it today and just put on YouTube. I mean, the things I see these kids do today, like what's the Italian guitar player? I think his name's Mancuso something.
Yes.
Jesus.
Nuts. Yeah.
All right. Maybe I can do that with 2 hands, but he's playing like a bass player and somehow he's able to get the pick attack perfect with articulation. And I sit there and watch that and awe. And then you'll find 5 seconds later, you see, a bunch of 20-year-olds or 15-year-olds doing the same thing in your play. So anyways, the reason I'm going on this tangent is to tell you today, everybody can do what I can do or Yngwie can do or Gilbert. Or it's kind of old news, to be honest. It's still fun to do, and I'm going to keep doing it until I drop because I love it. But if you want to have a career, if you want to touch people, you've got to be a great composer. You've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to be a great musician. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want to touch people, you've got to write great music. And if you want And for our age group, I'll give you a great example of that. If we think about Van Halen in his prime, now songs like I'm the One, that won me over. The solo on Ice Cream, that won me over. In Spanish Fly, that was the finale, it won me over. But listen to a song like Ain't Talking About Love. The guitar solo is not very complicated. It's pretty easy, actually, right? But think about the power of that riff and how great that song is, right? And Van Halen did that constantly, where he would play some songs where he'd impress you, and then he'd play other songs where the solo is almost not even a solo.
Yep.
And that was a good lesson for me, realizing, it's first and foremost, you must have a great song, and then try to create a great solo and express yourself, right? The way you're feeling internally, express that to the instrument, and hopefully that solo will complement the song and take it to a new level. For us, we just did a song called Wrathchild. Yes, same name as the Maiden song, but Wrathchild. And we did kind of something in that vein, where first, make sure it's a great song, great riff for our metal community, people that like our kind of music. And then you can do the technical guitar solo with all the fast playing, and then eventually a beautiful melody. And we've gotten so much positive reaction around the world on that song as well. And I've had a lot of people go, the solo. And I'm often going, the only reason you're talking about the solo is because you made it up to that 2-minute mark, and you did it because you liked the song. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it didn't tune out. Yeah, I have a couple thoughts about what you're saying. Is whenever I hear people say that guitar players or musicians now suck, or that everyone was better back in the day, I think they are out of their minds. Either they're not looking, or they're out of their minds, because the technical level of the younger generations now it's mind blowing. And I think that you're right. I do agree that it's because of the access to education. Back in the day, you were limited to your geography, basically. And if you were lucky enough to have a great guitar player, I know some people in LA had Joe Satriani as their teacher. That's luck that they happened to live close enough to where he was, and also he's the guy that they found. That's just luck of the draw. Now you don't have to have that luck. You can just go online and search out exactly what you're looking for and exactly how to do it right then and there. It's much, the time to improvement is just way condensed as opposed to back in the day. So I grew up in the 90s, and so I think that was, when I think back to what I had available for me as a guitar player then versus now, there's just no comparison. There's no comparison whatsoever. And I think about what I was doing in high school versus other kids around me that played guitar versus what I see now coming out of high schoolers. And the stuff I see coming out of high schoolers now would have blown minds in the 90s at any level. A lot of kids are better just technically than a lot of the lead guitar players were in famous bands. I'm not saying they're better writers, but just as technicians, it's crazy how good they've gotten.
Yeah. There's something else, as you were talking, something just appealed to me that I never thought about until right now. There was another difference. When I first got my very first guitar, I was 12 years old. I don't remember what year it was. Was it 1978, 76, somewhere around there? And my grandmother bought me that copy of a Les Paul. It was by a company called Cameo. The strings were that high off the fingerboard. Now I'm exaggerating, but they were high.
Yeah.
It was brutal to play. Instruments weren't like today, CNC. You have all this technology where a $200 guitar comes off the line. If you set it up right, that thing almost plays for you, so well. And the guitars we played when we were kids, these things were tough. It's like hearing the old blues guys who had to talk about, they had one banjo string and they had to make it work, right? But it was very much like that, where today these kids are watching stuff on YouTube and they're picking up these instruments, and if they're tuned properly and the action's close, all of a sudden it makes for an enjoyable experience, not an experience that you're about to be put through a lot of pain to try to do this, right?
Yeah, and the gear too is designed to sound is specifically designed to sound good doing whatever style you want to do. There's gear that's already tweaked out for it, whereas back in the day people were discovering distortion through messing with gear and sometimes getting great sounds through using something improperly. And yeah, there's some classic sounds that way, but you're talking about basically hot rodding a Chevy versus a Ferrari, which is what the gear is now. It's designed to be nuts. And these, some really cheap guitars now are pretty amazing. They're actually, one thing I've noticed is factory guitars now are better than a lot of the boutique guitars. That's how good the technology has gotten.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It used to be that way.
But that helps the evolution of the guitar player, right? All of a sudden the instrument, there's much less resistance,
Yep.
right? So whatever you want to play on the instrument now, it feels like it's almost achievable, right? And that, I think, coupled with the fact that you can go on a format like YouTube and find these amazing players. Guthrie Govan, I love, right?
Oh, yeah.
You watch him, the Tom Quayle fella, I've never met the guy, don't know much about him, but I've seen some footage. Another great player. I'm in awe watching these guys. But so if kids today want to learn from that stuff, right, they can go on YouTube and take a lesson in 5 seconds and have a lot of that information. And now that is building their foundation at a very young age. So if they take it seriously and they're fortunate enough to be able to make a career out of it, think about where they're going to be in 10 or 20 years, So as far as our ability to play, we're evolving very quickly. But, I will this is one thing a lot of people wonder about. Why are we even still here, right? The band Impellitteri, the one thing I've realized, so I'm flattered when people say, oh, you're an amazing soloist and blah, blah, blah. That's flattering. But I don't think that's the secret of why we're here. I think we're here, like I said, because going back to composition, if you can't write a good song, something that moves or touches your audience, then you just have basically 30 seconds of showing off. And there's 10 billion kids on YouTube that can do that today, right? So I think it's better for the artist today. If I were to tell kids something today, yes, work on your technique, work on your alternate picking and your chicken picking, work on understanding music theory and how to apply the scales and modes. Master that, because that will help you convey what you hear in your mind through the instrument. That's critical. But also work on the art of songwriting, whether it's heavy metal, I don't care if it's pop music, country music, or whatever. You need to have a great song. That's even if you listen to great classical artists, the reason we like them is because they had amazing compositions, whether it's Vivaldi, Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, whomever, right? So the critical thing is, yes, learn how to play fast and shred and all that stuff. If that's what moves you, it certainly moves me. But make sure first and foremost, great riff and great composition. And now you're off to the races.
I think that's great advice. I actually totally agree with you. That's the thing that people connect with. And at the end of the day, that's the thing that's timeless. Technique is not timeless because technique evolves, players get better. And so if we're looking at like the best technique from 50 years ago versus the best technique now, it's no contest. And that's 50 years from now, it'll be the same thing where they'll look at now and be like, wow, yeah, we're better now than they were then. But they will still remember the great songs from this era the same way that we still love great songs from 50 years ago. That is the thing that remains timeless. The technique is more just, it's what you got to do to be able to physically play the thing.
Well, yeah, and so I'll give you some food for thought. So right now we're promoting our new record, right? And their new record's called War Machine. And on this record, I will tell you, I work my ass off. I was probably playing 10 hours a day to make sure it was just perfection as far as the way I was playing, the way I was writing, etc. And it all seemed to come together. But I've been kind of reading comments, right? Because we just released 4 music videos. They put them up on YouTube. The first one was Out of My Mind. I think the second one was Wrathchild, and then Hell on Earth, and a fourth one. And where I'm going with this, if you guys get a chance, check out the song Hell on Earth. It's the new video we just released about 8 days ago, I guess. Yes, the song has some fun shredding. It's not that complicated for anybody that's really advanced. You'll get it. And there's a lot of Spanish Fly that I'm ripping off in there, for the fun, fast stuff. But listen to the riff. If you don't get addicted within the first 5 seconds of that riff, then we don't have you, right? And right now our record, which is crazy, I just got the report this morning from our label. The president of the label said we are now the number 8th most added hard rock band in the United States right now, which is insane.
That's killer.
We were number 1 and number 2 last week for heavy metal ads. Japan, we just went number 1, right? And Japan, believe me, I know why we've succeeded, because yes, I evidently I started great, had my little interim of crappiness, and then got back to being really good. And so I was able to maintain our Japan audience, but those songs really resonate with them. And there, it's the same thing. These riffs are hitting them hard. And then luckily the solos there's a lot of fire in there in the solos, and it's resonating. And it shows you we're having success at this age of our lives, which, by the way, we should be dead in the grave and long over, right? But it speaks to the power of just good songs and being able, if that's what your audience, and when I say good songs, by the way, I'm not saying what we do is the greatest thing ever. I'm just saying for our genre, that's not the word, our genre, whatever, our type of music for our audience, it's working big time. So anyways, but it's because those riffs bring them in. And then Rob, our singer, the great vocals and the choruses that everybody can sing along with, it makes it fun no matter how heavy it is. Right. And then if I do a good job, the solo, I got you guys. Now you guys are,
Adding Paul Bostaph doesn't hurt either.
Monster on this one. Monster.
It's pretty killer. That's one of the greats in my opinion. Yeah, that's I checked the songs out. First of all, I agree with you. And I was paying attention to the YouTube comments, and it's super positive, which is really, really cool to see. And they sound killer. So whoever mixed it did a really good job too.
Yeah, it tells you. And by the way, Impellitteri, this is something you probably already know, but Impellitteri has always been a band. It's never been about me. Now, the reason it's called Impellitteri, it was an homage to my grandparents who saved my life. It was a tribute to them. Now, as far as a band name, it's the world's worst band name ever, right? But we did it more, at least initially, with me and Rob, kind of like thanking them because they gave me this life. And so having said that, when you hear Paul's contribution or Rob's contribution or a bass player, James, it is so vital to the success of this music. Without them, this record would be eh. But when you have all for one, one for all, and you have synergy, you get something very, very special. And as you're talking about Paul right now, Paul, it's interesting. Paul is well known for being a thrash metal drummer. Obviously, he's the drummer of Slayer, and right now he's also playing with Kerry King, and he is going on tour with us. We're about to announce Japan. But what he brings is a heaviness. He can play all the fast, really intricate fills, 30-second note triplets, whatever we need, he can do. And he can do all the fast double bass drumming. But what he does that I haven't really seen a lot of thrash drummers have the ability to do is he can play like John Bonham. He can make our song swing no matter how fast the tempo is, right? Or complex it is. And that shows you, when you have a good team, which is, I guess, the next step of you need a great riff, great composition, then you have fiery solo, but then you also need an amazing percussionist, right? Because that's the foundation. right? That's what we're all sitting on, what we're playing off of, right? And he has that ability to just make it better than it maybe really is, right? That to me is
That's
the mark of a great musician.
that was actually what I always loved about him was his feel. I mean, yes, of course, his ability to play fast stuff, but really, there's a lot of drummers who can play fast. I think that what I've always liked about him is his the way he phrases his fills and the feel. When he's playing, songs feel good, and that's to me that's the mark of a great drummer is when they're playing. How does the song feel? Like feel like bob in your head, or does it feel like stale, lifeless, robotic? I think metal drummers, if they're good technically but not good, good but not good, you hear the speed, but it almost feels like a robot. But we are out of time, so I want to thank you very much for taking the time to hang out, man. It's been a total pleasure.
Yeah, you are the most interesting journalist that I've spoken with. You are very well versed. You're obviously a great musician because you have that breadth of knowledge. You're the first one that actually asked me these kind of questions, which is it's refreshing. It really is.
Well, I appreciate it. I don't consider myself a journalist.
You're not a journalist, wrong word.
But I do this this podcast because first of all, I enjoy it. But it's connected to some of the other things I do, but it's a chance for me to have good conversations with people who I wouldn't be able to have the conversations otherwise, because you can't just call somebody you don't know and get an hour or two of their time. It just doesn't work that way. So I feel like a podcast is a great way to meet people and get to ask people questions that you've had for them sometimes for years. It comes from a genuine interest in the music, I guess. But thank you.
Yeah. Well, it was a great speaking with you either way. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And good luck with the record and the tour, and hopefully we do this again.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And again, have a wonderful day.